I would tell my younger self to read and research more and stay on top of available technology. So I manage a group that's responsible for the security tools, the cybersecurity tools that the company uses to protect their servers and network infrastructure. And that ranges from log monitoring to antivirus protection on your laptops and cell phones and things like that, all the way to actually responding to security events, whether that's hacking or phishing or any of the other terms that most of you probably recognize by now.
Welcome to the Job Dictionary podcast. Today I'm going to be interviewing Rhett Smith to learn more about what it's like to work in specifically a role as the one he's holding right now, which is the Senior Manager of Cybersecurity Engineering. He's with Baker Hughes, and I'm really excited to welcome him today. So, hello, Rhett. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Angie.
I'm so
Glad to be
excited.
here.
Thank you so much for coming. And okay, we're going to start up with 3 quick questions just to
Okay.
kind of get an overview of who you are. So, in your own words, what do you do? Where do you live? And as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So I manage a group that's responsible for the security tools, the cybersecurity tools that the company uses to protect their servers and network infrastructure. And that ranges from log monitoring to antivirus protection on your laptops and cell phones and things like that, all the way to actually responding to security events, whether that's hacking or phishing or any of the other terms that most of you probably recognize by now. Um, I am located in Katy, Texas. The company is located in Houston, which is just west of there. And actually, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a home builder. I wanted to build houses. I don't know when I lost that interest, but anyway, that's what I wanted to do.
Well, it's always fun to hear what people wanted to do when they were younger, and then they end up in a totally separate field.
Oh, for sure.
All right, so could you tell me how long you've been working in this field?
So I started in cybersecurity around 2006 when I was working for a large power company here in Houston. Well, it's actually national, but in any event, I was responsible for securing their energy management system, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a control system that a power company would use to control their power plants and how energy gets transmitted across transmission lines, so from the power plant all the way to your house. And
Awesome.
so my primary role was to actually just do system admin for those systems, but because of regulatory compliance, we had to do some securing of those environments. And that's how I really got into cybersecurity from a career path.
Awesome. All right. And so, what made you want to get into this career path? How did you start?
So the interesting thing about my journey into cybersecurity is it came from what we call operational technology. So I mentioned the energy management system. It's a control system. So it actually tells a power plant to spin faster, spin slower, generate more power, generate less power. So it's actually a control system that's controlling a process of some sort. You can think about a refinery, same thing, same type of thing. And so it was very intriguing to me because I have an electrical engineering degree, and
Hmm.
so I was always interested in that. I actually worked on a farm that had a control system in it way back in the 80s when I was in school, and so that interested me. So I started with the energy management system and then actually got into securing some of the control systems at the power plants and out in the field. And that's really where I got my start. And it really interested me a lot because it encompassed both the control system aspect as well as security.
Awesome. And I know you mentioned that you have an electrical engineering degree.
Mhm.
Could you share perhaps what degrees or certifications are typically required to get into this job, and if there's a theme and what type of engineer goes into this?
So, yeah, my degree is in electrical engineering, and I'm old enough to where computer engineering was just getting started. So there were no cybersecurity programs really across the country. Now there are plenty of really, really good cybersecurity programs. We have several here in Texas, few in Georgia and other areas of the country. And so if somebody was really interested in getting into cybersecurity, there's actually a career, a college path that you can take to get there, get your degree and certifications along the way. The interesting thing is you can get really good without having a degree, but it does help because you get exposure to the underlying infrastructures of networking and how computers communicate and things like that. So it does help.
Thank you so much. And are there any other job titles that this position or this type of role tends to go by, or is it mainly just, cybersecurity blank? Just curious.
So the folks that work for me, most of them, we would call them security engineers. But this is specific to the engineering role. There are security analysts, which would actually, if there was an event, they would actually look at the event and investigate the event and then respond. So let's just say you had malware on your laptop and we got an alert about that, then those folks would actually respond and take the appropriate action to clean that up off your system, notify you, and things like that. That's a simple example, but it can go all the way into a hacker got into our network, and we had to actually go see what the impact was, if there was any um, information stolen or anything like that. So it can get into that. And then there's also the folks that are responsible for deploying all of these technologies, whether it's some monitoring on a server or out on the network and things like that. So there's architects, there's engineers, and then there's analysts. So security architects, security engineers, security analysts.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So there's definitely different areas to it, which
Yeah,
is
and I
good to
wanted to
know.
mention I failed to answer one piece of your question before. You said certifications. There are
Okay.
plenty of certifications in the cybersecurity area. The CISSP, which is the one most people know about. The one
Okay.
that I have is a GICSP, which is the industrial cybersecurity portion of that. So there are plenty of certifications. They certainly help. They're not necessary, but obviously, if you're trying to break into a role like this, like like an engineer or an analyst, then they certainly do help.
Thank you. Appreciate you for sharing that. And okay, so now that we kind of have an understanding of what the scope of this type of role can be, I would love to hear about what a day in the life is like for your job. And, does a lot of that include working remote, working solo, working with a group of people? All of those things, if you could share, would be super valuable.
Sure. So I work primarily remote. Most of my team works primarily remote. My team is scattered from India to the UAE to
Oh,
a few different places in the United States. And the systems that we work on are all over the globe. So it doesn't really matter if we're in the same office or we're just having a conversation on a video chat like you and I are today,
that's
which is
great.
a nice thing. So, what do I do most of the day? As a manager, I'm on calls a lot more often than I'd like to be, but it's necessary to understand what our customers, internal customers, if you will, other groups inside of our business that use our tools, what their needs are, what their pain points are. How can we help them with the tools that we have? Whether we can automate different processes that they use so that they don't have to do tedious manual processes, or just understanding what's new that's coming so that we can prepare our systems to function appropriately when those types of things hit. So from the standpoint of what my team would do, each application is different, but for the most part, they're looking at ways that they can leverage more features in the system. They're making sure that we have all of the data that we need to get into the system, whether it's logs from computers or network devices or even other applications. So they're making sure that the applications are running the way they're supposed to, and then that we're leveraging all of the features that would be applicable to us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And so you shared a bit of kind of just what day to day is like. Could you now expand a bit on what specific tasks you might spend the majority of your day doing individually?
Yeah, so again, I'll talk about the management part and I'll talk about the technical part, which is probably more interesting. So the specific task, like I said, my role as a manager is to first and foremost to grow the people that work for me.
Hmm.
So to make sure that I understand what their interests are, where they want to go with their career, and how I can put them in a place or give them opportunities to grow those skill sets and get the exposure that they need so that they can either promote within the company or maybe have an opportunity someplace else. So as a manager, that's what my primary focus is. I'm responsible for a lot of other things, but I have a big responsibility to my employees. And hopefully when you all get out into the workforce, you will have a manager that's looking out for you and where you want to go in your career as well. But more of my work is strategic in nature. So are we using the right tools? Are the tools that we implemented 3 years ago still the right tools for our particular use cases? Are we paying too much for the tools that we use? Are there better options out there? So from a strategic perspective, that's where I start to do most of my tasks, besides the day-to-day management of people and listening to customers that are not happy or anything like that. From a technical perspective, my team works inside the applications. They make changes. They do changes to configurations or for enhancements. They will do a whole lot of troubleshooting. If we get a request, then they'll evaluate the request and try to implement changes that are made. So we could get a request for a new log source. Maybe we have a new application that they need us to get logs so we can monitor, make sure that, if there are any vulnerabilities and things like that, then we would want to pull that new log source in. Or maybe in our automation platform, some of the security analysts who have to respond to things. Let's say, for instance, you received a phishing email and you clicked on a link that
Mhm.
was malicious. Well, we would more than likely get an alert on something like that. And the system that we have, the analyst can simply say, okay, I want to run this response list of things. And it would probably force you to change your password. It would scan your laptop to see, okay, is there anything else going on? Were there any processes that were started? And to do some research and data reconnaissance on that. So we can automate a lot of those processes instead of an analyst having to take the time to do it. And when they
Wow.
start to look at that event, all of that data is there for them. So that's a whole lot of automation. But there's a whole bunch of tools that my team's responsible for, so we could talk for days on what else they actually do. But most of it is using the tools to secure the enterprise.
That is great. And to expand right off of that point, I know that cybersecurity, again, is going to be a role that's very technical. You have a lot of different tools that you use. Could you tell us, perhaps pick like the three main tools or technologies that you work with?
Sure. So we primary tool is collection tool is a many. It's very well known. It's called Splunk. It's a security incident event management information event management system. And what it does is it collects logs from many different sources, and it then correlates them to see, okay, did something happen over here? That may not be a big deal, but if this happened over here and this happened at the same time, then those two events at the same time may mean something. And that may send an alert to the analyst to look at. That's probably our most important tool from a security perspective as far as detection. Then we have, I would say, our antivirus and our endpoint protection, which is all out there in all of the 80,000 plus laptops that everybody's walking around with. Um, we restrict the ability for people to use USB drives, so you can't just plug your phone in and
Oh,
start and write anything to it. Part of that is, people have access to intellectual property. Well, we don't want people just copying that to a USB drive and taking it off someplace, because if they lose that drive, then we've lost intellectual property. So that's also part of cybersecurity.
gotcha.
Um, and I'd say the last one is the one I was talking about a minute ago, our automation platform. It's called the Security Orchestration and Automation and Response Tool. And what it does is it takes in the events, it reaches out to a bunch of different systems to pull additional information. So if Angie was doing something bad and we got a notice about that, then our system would go out and it would pull information about, okay, who is Angie? Where is she? Who is her supervisor? What emails
Interesting.
has Angie sent outside the company lately? And things like this. That's
Yeah.
probably the third one that's a big deal.
That is very interesting. Okay. And so, just looking back, you are, of course, in a managing position, and even just from this conversation, I can tell you're very passionate about working with people. So I would love to hear what is the most exciting or interesting thing about your job. And I would love to hear about it from the managing side and from the more technical side.
Sure. So from the management side, um, I get the most excitement and joy out of seeing my employees progress and for them to grow, and not only grow in a technical aspect, but also in soft skills, how they interact with our customers, how they interact with each other, how they lead, because most of them have the opportunity to lead small projects or even larger projects. So how do you lead other people that don't work for you necessarily, but you need things from them? And it's really rewarding to see someone progress it to a point where they take off. And you hate to see people move on, but that's part of my job. I'm successful if somebody gets promoted and moves on. And that's a
Yeah.
great thing. That's probably the most exciting and most rewarding thing. From a technical perspective, when you can reduce the time that it takes for an analyst to respond to an event by 15, 20 minutes, or even 5 minutes, when you add that up to, when you multiply that by the number of events we get on a daily basis, is very impactful to that individual, because they're not constantly doing the same tedious tasks of pulling information in or running responses. That's very exciting, and it's rewarding as well.
Awesome. And from all that positive, just a bit of a more negative question. What tends to be more emotionally challenging or even boring regarding this type of role?
Boring is sitting on calls that don't have a whole lot of meaning, or that I really don't need to be on, but people invited me and I need to be there anyway.
Right.
And I think most people in corporate America today would probably say that.
For sure.
Uh, I think the most emotional thing is when you have an employee that would be a challenge. Maybe they're in a role that they not really a fit for them, but they were put in this role through some means. Maybe someone thought, hey, you know what, this would be a good fit here. They'd be able to contribute and add value. It's really hard to have those conversations when you have to talk to somebody about, hey, look, what can we do to help you? And maybe they're just in the wrong spot. So those are the ones. That's the one that really kind of tugs at your heartstrings, if you will.
Makes sense. Makes complete sense. And it sounds like you are a great leader, and that is always great to hear and to see, especially in corporate America, like you're mentioning.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rhett, could you tell me, in terms of your work, you work remotely, but do you feel that you can leave work between your 9 to 5 time, or do you feel that you have to take some home and work outside those hours?
So I think I'm a kind of a in between. I can leave. I mean, I work from home, so it's hard to leave work behind because the laptop's always there, right? I do have a work phone and a personal phone. So when for weekends, unless I know something's going on, the work phone stays behind. So I
That's
do
good.
separate it from that perspective. Generally, I can walk away, but there are times where, you need to be available. So fortunately, there is a good balance for me and the team that I have, because we're not in an operational position where if something goes down, unless it's one of our tools, we
Right.
have to be able to respond on a 24-hour basis.
Okay. So that's great to hear. So then, in terms of flexibility, would you say that it varies from team to team?
Very much so. My particular team is fairly flexible. I have multiple employees overseas, so I generally start very early and finish up around probably maybe 4 o'clock. I try to finish up before then, but usually I'm still around. Um, but the folks in India and the UAE, they start later. So
Right.
with the two of us doing that, we have a little more overlap and time with each other. They're doing plenty of work while I'm sleeping, but we do need that time. So we usually have around 3 hours, sometimes four, depending on the employee, where we have overlap and we have time to meet, discuss, support, all of those kinds of things. But it is relatively flexible. I always tell my folks, if you've got something with a kid, hey, oh, they've got, a festival or something at school. Well, by all means, take that hour and a half, go spend that time with your kids. Work-life balance is important. You need to be able to take care of yourself. Can't take care of work if you're not taking care of yourself.
Agreed. Would you say that is something that directly connects to the nature of the role, or would you say it's also something that derives from the culture in the company that you're with?
That's an awesome question. I would say it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
Fortunately, my leadership, both my boss and his boss, um, really big on family, really big on work-life balance. But we all understand, when you take a professional role, you have responsibilities, so you have to have that balance. But I do think the culture at Baker Hughes is such that we care about our people, and I think you see that, and that's part of why I say go to the festival with your kid
Yeah.
at school and those kinds of things. But it also comes from the role. Again, we don't have a whole lot of operational things that we're responsible for. As
Yes.
long as our systems are running, we can walk away for a little bit. There are other groups that, you know, if you have a certain system go down, it's all hands on deck, and whatever's going on, it has to come second. So I think it's both culture as well as the role that my team has.
Makes sense. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And then a quick thing that I'm interested to hear about, because I know you've mentioned like that sense of urgency or like needing to do something right now doesn't tend to happen very often, specifically with your team. Do you think there are busier seasons throughout the year, or would you say that most of the work stays around consistent year round?
Now, there are busier times of the year. I think the end of each quarter, because you're doing financial close and things like that. There are oftentimes, um, how would I want to say, like immediate needs. So, hey, I need this yesterday, kind of a thing. For my particular team, it's not as bad as for others. Like if you were in finance or something like that, obviously you're going to burn the midnight oil to get the numbers to Wall Street, right? So, um, but yeah, I'd say end of quarter as well as the end of the year gets pretty busy just because we're wrapping things up.
Makes sense. And that I feel like goes for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Definitely important times for companies. Okay, Rhett, could you tell me what is something that people underestimate about this profession? And then finish off by telling me something people might overestimate about this specific type of role.
So I think many people underestimate what the risk really is from a cybersecurity perspective. Everybody walks around with these in their hands, and there's a whole lot of emails and texts and things like that. And it all is for you to click on the wrong link to have something happen, whether it's on your phone or your laptop or any of those things. And so oftentimes people underestimate what the importance is of securing not only from a corporation, but also in your house. Your computer probably has a bunch of financial documents or, obviously personal information. So
Yes.
security numbers, all of those things, and people don't realize that, they're just as vulnerable as anyone else. Um, so what was the other piece?
And then overestimating about the type of role.
Well, there's a lot of interest in hacking and like that. So in some cases, people may think that a role like this, or as an analyst or an incident responder, would be kind of glamorous because you get to see some wild things, and that's true in some cases. I mean, we hope that we never have a event,
Right.
especially one that ends up on the TV or on the news.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not that on a day to day. It's not quite as exciting as that, and quite frankly, we don't want it to be in
Right.
cybersecurity.
Yes. That would mean that maybe there needs to be change in how this iris is done.
Or it may need to be a change in job for me. It depends on how good I'm doing, right?
Right. Complete sense. Okay. So I know you talked about it earlier, just a few different certifications and ways to break into this specific type of role. What would you say is the fastest way to get into the profession, especially if you're perhaps someone coming from a non traditional background? What is a good way to get your foot in the door?
So, in today's world, as I mentioned before, there are cybersecurity degrees. I would say if you really wanted to get started, it would be to go to school and get a cybersecurity degree. It's one of those where you're really going to learn a lot of the basics that you need to learn, as well as different tactics and methods of detecting and responding to potential threats and reducing risk. Um, but short of that, if it's, for instance, somebody graduated, well, I'll take my boss, for example. He graduated in business, and he ended up,
Okay.
he even owned his own restaurant. But he then went back to school and got a degree with cybersecurity, and now he's up through the ranks, and now he's a director. So there are a lot of different paths you can take. The interesting thing about IT in general is that you don't necessarily need a degree. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you don't go to college. Don't get me wrong. I think there's a lot of
Yes.
value there. But some of the best people that have worked for me over the years did not have a college degree. It's very easy to learn IT on your own, um, but there's a lot of complexity to it too. So if you go that route, it takes a lot longer, obviously.
Makes sense. And going off of that, I know firsthand that at, for example, my business school, we have a major which is management information systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know a lot of people who are in that specific major are wanting to go into cybersecurity. So it's good to know that you don't have to necessarily be an engineer student to want to go into the field.
Yeah, it's more about knowledge and experience, really. And so if you can if you can go that route, concentrate in cybersecurity, if you're in a business path, that certainly would work. In that case, you would want to look for maybe an internship or a part-time job where you're actually getting hands-on experience with, in a cybersecurity area. It would be helpful if you wanted to get into it coming out.
Awesome. And so, with your experience, you're in a higher level of specifically managing role right now. What is like the specific field that you're seeing people come from to get into a role, maybe perhaps at Baker Hughes? Is it random? I know you mentioned some people don't even have to have a degree in the area at all. Do you see any themes just from your experience?
We're seeing a lot more entry-level candidates come out of college with the cybersecurity degree, not only here
Okay.
in the United States, but also overseas. Um, you see it in a lot of countries in Europe as well as throughout the Middle East and India for sure. So that's really where we're seeing most of it. I'm seeing, when I talk about somebody coming up without a degree, you really work your way up through small areas, then
Right.
contracting, if you will, and so you get to ultimately you get an opportunity to get on full time with a
Is
company.
great. Okay. So definitely, again, it's a very technical type of role. So you want to have that experience, and having a specific degree in it is going to be very helpful. Could you perhaps tell me what someone should be good at if they're going to be successful in a role in cybersecurity, like a quality or specific
You have to
personality
have a.
trait?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, it's all good.
Sure. So you have to have drive to want to learn new things. Um, Technology changes so
All
fast,
the time.
and if you're not constantly reading and doing research on what's new, what hackers are doing, what new technologies are available, then it will leave you behind. And it's been that way in IT for a long, long time, and now cybersecurity is really no different. And now the um, with the AI, that's completely
Yes.
changed the cybersecurity landscape, both from
Mm.
a protection perspective, but also from a threat perspective, because they have access to ChatGPT too.
Yes, they do. And ChatGPT can code.
Yes, it
I
can.
can, because I have had to use it. Um, oh my goodness,
Nice.
but that is for a whole other story. Um, so could you tell me how long does it perhaps take? How long did it take you to get really good at cybersecurity? You've been in these roles, and I'm assuming, building upwards through the company. So I would love to hear what you have to say about that timeline.
So I didn't have any formal training in cybersecurity. It was mostly learn on the job. I would say after about 8 years, I
Okay.
felt like I was a subject matter expert in cybersecurity.
Awesome.
There's just that much to learn and understand because you really have to have a grasp on what IT infrastructure looks like. You need to understand what email looks like. You need to understand what the server infrastructure and things like that look like. You have to have a basic understanding of those things. You have to know what you need to protect and understand that before you can actually protect it and then respond with it.
Okay. So again, just even more emphasis that you have to want to learn. You have to stay curious because it's constantly changing and it's very in depth. Um,
Exactly.
information that you have to understand.
Now,
Okay.
someone coming out of school with a cybersecurity degree would have an advantage, right?
Right.
Because in theory, they would have been taught and learned
The foundation
what
of that.
today is, right? And then continue that research and development.
Yes, for sure. And okay, so I was mentioning, like, I know you've been through a timeline and you've, been in different roles. Could you share what the typical promotion path looks like for cybersecurity? Kind of walk me through the hierarchy, per se, of what a junior role might look like and going up from there.
So I can tell you a little bit about my team. So I do have a couple of junior, if you will. I have a few folks that have just come out of college, and they were well prepared as far as the basic knowledge of infrastructure and things like I mentioned before. Really, they just needed to learn the tools. I guess that's another good quality. You have to be able to learn quickly. So the faster you can learn something, the quicker you're going to be able to progress in your career. So I have two of them. They work across several of our. They're doing that. I've asked them to, hey, which tool do you like to work in the best? Which one do you want to take the deep dive into? And once they tell me that, then we'll put them through some training and we'll start to give them more challenging tasks associated with those applications. And so once they grow in there, then in theory, they would start to develop all of those technical skills, some additional soft skills, maybe move up to lead that application or even lead another
Okay.
application once they're there. And once you get to that point and you're really driving some projects and things like that, and you get that leadership skill underneath you, then maybe you look to becoming a manager or something to that effect.
Okay, that's great. And is there any chance you could share like how much time you think each person spends in each of those levels that you just explained?
I would say it's about, so I'll just use one of mine for an example. I have one employee who has been working with me for about 18 months. After about 9 months, they said, hey, I really want to get into this application. So we started her down that path. She's getting really good at it. I would say give her another 2 years, a year and a half,
Okay.
really diving into the application, working with the application lead and understanding the challenges and getting more experience with different issues. You know, all these applications, they have hiccups and things. And so you see different things throughout that exposure.
Yes.
Then she would probably be ready to start looking into maybe a lead role or something like that. I would say probably 3, maybe 4 years before, for an entry level person to come in
Okay.
and maybe move up to a lead role. And that some of that would depend on, their soft skills as well.
Right.
It's not just a technical piece. It's also the soft
Yes.
skills.
So it's very person to person and the qualities they need to grow.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you for providing that.
Yeah.
And okay, so this is certainly a more personal question. So I'm curious if you could share some stats on what a starting salary might look like in this area of cybersecurity, and as broad as you want to provide a range of what an average salary might look like for someone at your level.
So the range, with a global community, global community, if you will, every country is different and the
Yes.
ranges of salaries are different. And you'd be amazed at the difference. Actually, I'm sure you can go look up statistics, but keeping it in U.S. dollars for
Yes.
a U.S. employee, I would say, somebody coming out of school in cybersecurity um, at an entry level, maybe somewhere between 60 and 100, depending on what maybe they had a specific internship, maybe they
Right.
were working with a consulting company part time while they were in school. It would kind of depend on those types of things. My
Okay.
leads currently are making somewhere between 110, 160 ish,
Okay.
if you will. Then a manager, it would go up from there. It kind of depends on how much the manager's uh, responsible for and things like that.
Got you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. And people my age who are going to be listening to this are definitely going to find that information very valuable. Um, and it's always, and what you're saying, with all these salaries and keeping that in mind, it's important, but it's also important how you feel in a company, how you feel in the job, and just the culture you're working with. Um, And okay, so we are actually reaching almost the end of the interview, so just a few more questions.
Sure.
So I'm curious, when people in your field tend to move on from that type of role in cybersecurity, do you happen to see that they go often into a very specific type of role afterwards? Are there any themes, or do they just, usually retire or stay within that track?
I've seen several people go to teaching. So, at
Okay.
universities, depending on what their qualifications are, or even in high schools, if they offer some type of technical, like networking or security or it's like that.
Yes.
Some folks will just say, you know what, I just want to go back to being a task individual contributor, and they'll go back into basic IT. So maybe they'll go do system administration or do some networking and things like that. Um, Kind of depends on the individual, but that's kind of where I've seen them go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. And I would love to hear if there's any, you talked about, keeping up with the changes. Technology is constantly changing. So, what are some books, resources, programs, podcasts, anything you could think of that you would recommend to someone wanting to get into this profession? And if you don't mind, also, if there is any that you don't recommend that might be popular but you don't think are valuable, then give them a shout out.
Okay. So there's one, when people think of cybersecurity, they think of virus and detection and threaten those. I mean, detections and responses, things like that. But what really needs to be evaluated is the threat. What is the risk? And so one of the books that I read early on was called Threat Modeling: Designing for Security. Its author is Adam Shostak. And then from a management perspective, there's a book called Turn the Ship Around. It's by David Marquette. He's a retired nuclear sub commander. It's a pretty interesting read and about how to work with people, different types of people, and just look at management and guiding from a different perspective. There's plenty of free online training and resources available today. There's a site called Cybrary that
Interesting.
has a lot of free cybersecurity training. They also have some free kind of capture the flag type things where you try to hack different stuff. So it's kind of interesting. LinkedIn has some free trainings. There's plenty. I mean, you can Google it, but those two, I've actually used those two both for myself as well as some of my staff. I really don't have any that I would know
Well,
to. At least I haven't come
okay.
across any. But I guess I've
Awesome.
just had good recommendations from others in the past, so I haven't come
That's good.
across one.
Well, that's always good. Getting advice from, again, people like you and people in the field who do know. And okay, so reaching our final question, what would you tell your younger self when you're at the beginning of your career that might be helpful to anyone listening who is younger today?
I would tell my younger self to read and research more and stay on top of available technology and what threat actors are doing. Because I feel like early on I progressed a little bit more had I been more diligent and actually taking the time to do those things.
Awesome. Okay. And well, Rhett, that is the end of this interview. I would love to hear from you if there is anywhere where people can find you or follow along what you're, where you're working, your LinkedIn, anything of the sort. We really appreciate you for being on this show today. And thank you for all the valuable things that you had to share.
Well, I appreciate you thinking of me. It was certainly a pleasure visiting, and hopefully we'll get to talk again soon.
Yes, sir. All right.
You just got one episode closer to learning about the world of jobs out there. To explore the rest of our career categories and find your best fit, go to jobdictionary.com to sign up for the beta users waitlist. Then subscribe here to find the next episodes coming out this week. And as always, drop us a comment, review, or message to let us know how we can better attune our episodes to your specific needs. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, Threads, Pinterest, and wherever else you're on socials to go get our short, snappy preview reels that expose you to new job options every day. Because here at Job Dictionary, we believe your big aha moment can be just one scroll away. Go check it out and get out there. Cheers!